At Christmas, my in-laws mocked my daughter as she cried. Even my husband laughed. I left without a word. What I did next left them speechless and pale. My mother-in-law grabbed her and yelled, "Go back to your mother before I slap you." My sister-in-law scoffed, "You can keep your trash kids away from mine." My husband chimed in, "Don't worry, I won't be bringing them next time. They ruin everything." I remained silent as everyone chuckled at my daughter's tears. I took my daughter and left, and what I did next left them utterly stunned. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I never truly understood that until December 23, 2020, when my entire world shifted at what was supposed to be a joyous Christmas gathering. My name is Hannah, and this is the account of how one humiliating incident led to the most satisfying retribution I've ever carried out. Let me begin at the start. I met my husband Brandon 7 years ago at a coffee shop near my workplace. He was charming, humorous, and appeared genuinely interested in getting to know me. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and I thought I was fortunate to have found such a wonderful partner. What I didn't realize was that Brandon came with challenges I wasn't prepared for. His family. Brandon's mother, Elaine, was what you might call a traditional woman who believed wives should be seen and not heard. She had very specific ideas about how families should operate, and unfortunately, I never fit her vision of the perfect daughter-in-law. From the moment Brandon introduced me, Elaine made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her precious son. She would make subtle remarks about my career, my appearance, my cooking, and especially about how I was raising my daughter from my previous relationship. My daughter, Chloe, was 3 when Brandon and I married 5 years ago. Chloe's biological father had never been involved, and Brandon initially seemed enthusiastic about becoming a stepfather. He was wonderful with Chloe during our courtship, taking her to parks, reading her bedtime stories, and even assisting with potty training. I thought we were building a beautiful blended family. Brandon's sister, Monica, was even more problematic than Elaine. Monica had 2 children, Tyler, who was 5, and Sophia, who was 4. She constantly boasted about how advanced and well-behaved her children were, often making comparisons to Chloe that weren't exactly subtle. Monica worked as a real estate agent and considered herself quite accomplished, though she lived in a modest townhouse that her parents had helped her acquire. For the past 5 years of marriage, I endured their passive-aggressive comments, their exclusion of Chloe from family photos, and their general disdain for me. Brandon would occasionally defend me when things became truly unbearable, but most of the time he would just shrug and say, "That's just how they are, Hannah. Don't take it personally." The breaking point arrived at Elaine's annual Christmas party. She hosted it every year at her large colonial house in the suburbs, inviting extended family, neighbors, and family friends. It was always a grand production with catered food, professional decorations, and expensive gifts under a 12-foot tree. Chloe was now 8 years old, bright and energetic, but also sensitive to the way Brandon's family treated her. She had started asking me why Grandma Elaine didn't hug her like she hugged Tyler and Sophia, and why Aunt Monica's kids received better presents than she did. I had been running out of excuses and gentle explanations. That December evening, Chloe wore her favorite red velvet dress that we had chosen together specifically for the party. She was so excited to see her cousins and had been talking about playing with them all week. I had hoped that maybe this year would be different, that perhaps the family would finally accept Chloe as one of their own. The party was in full swing when we arrived. Elaine had truly outdone herself with the decorations. There were garlands everywhere, twinkling lights, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. About 30 people were mingling in the living room and dining room, sipping wine and enjoying appetizers. Chloe immediately spotted Tyler and Sophia playing with a new train set under the Christmas tree. Her face lit up with pure joy as she ran toward them, her little feet pattering across the hardwood floor. She was so eager to join in their game. That's when everything went wrong. Elaine intercepted Chloe before she could reach the other children. She grabbed Chloe's arm, not gently, and her voice cut through the party chatter like a sharp blade. "Go back to your mother before I slap you." The entire room fell silent. Chloe's face crumpled, confusion and hurt washing over her features. She looked up at Elaine with tears forming in her eyes, not understanding what she had done wrong. Monica, who had been watching from across the room, let out a snort of laughter. "Hannah, can you keep your trash kids away from mine?" They were having such a nice time before she interrupted. I felt my face burn with humiliation and fury. But before I could respond, Brandon's voice joined the chorus. "Don't worry, Mom, I won't be bringing them next time. They ruin everything anyway." The casual cruelty in his voice was like a physical blow. This was the man I had married, the man who had promised to love and protect both Chloe and me. And here he was, publicly agreeing that my daughter was worthless, that she ruined things just by existing. Several family members and friends started giggling and whispering to each other, clearly entertained by the drama. Chloe looked around the room with wide, terrified eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. She ran back to me and buried her face in my legs, sobbing. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding my crying daughter while an entire room full of people stared at us with amusement and disdain. The humiliation was overwhelming. But underneath it, something cold and resolute was forming in my chest. A determination that would change everything. I didn't utter a word. I simply picked up Chloe, grabbed our coats, and walked out of that house. The drive home was silent except for Chloe's quiet sniffles from the back seat. That night, after Chloe finally fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. I was done being the victim. I was done letting these people treat my daughter like she was less than human. And I was done with a husband who would abandon us to gain his family's approval. But I wasn't going to explode or cause a scene. I was going to be smart about this, strategic. I was going to hit them where it would hurt the most, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly why their lives were unraveling. The first thing I did was start documenting everything. I began keeping a detailed journal of every interaction with Brandon's family. Every cruel comment, every instance of Chloe being excluded or mistreated. I also started recording conversations when legally permissible in our state, using my phone's voice memo app during family gatherings and phone calls where I was a participant. Brandon came home around midnight that night, clearly having had a few more drinks after I left. He stumbled into our bedroom and had the audacity to be annoyed with me. "Why did you leave like that, Hannah? You embarrassed me in front of my whole family." I looked at him with new clarity. "I embarrassed you? Yeah, you just stormed out without saying anything. My mom was really upset. Your mom called our daughter trash, Brandon. Your sister called her trash. You agreed with them." He waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. They didn't mean it like that. Chloe was being disruptive, and you know how kids can get. They were just trying to keep the peace." That's when I realized that Brandon had been so deeply programmed by his family's toxicity that he genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what had happened. In his mind, Chloe was the problem, not the adults who had publicly humiliated an 8-year-old child. I didn't argue with him that night. Instead, I started planning. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day making phone calls and doing research. I contacted a divorce attorney, a family therapist, and began looking into Brandon's business finances. See, Brandon owned a small construction company that he had built over the past 6 years. It was doing well, but I had suspicions about some of his business practices. Brandon's company, Brennan Construction, specialized in home renovations and had built a solid reputation in our area. However, I had noticed some irregularities in the way he handled his taxes and employee payments. As his wife, I had legitimate access to many of his financial documents that were stored in our shared home office, and I started photographing and copying everything I could find. What I discovered was even worse than I had suspected. Brandon had been paying several of his workers under the table to avoid taxes and workers' compensation insurance. He had also been inflating costs on several jobs and pocketing the difference, which constituted fraud. Additionally, he had been using business funds for personal expenses and claiming them as business deductions on his taxes. But that was just the beginning of my investigation. I also started looking into Monica's real estate business through public records and industry connections. Monica worked for a small agency and was always bragging about her sales numbers and how much money she was making. However, some of her social media posts and casual comments had made me suspicious about her methods. Through public property records and conversations with people in the real estate industry who knew about her practices, I discovered that Monica had been engaging in some questionable activities. She had been showing clients houses that weren't actually on the market yet, sometimes even using information from other agents' lockbox codes to gain access. She had also been manipulating her commission rates by convincing elderly clients to sign contracts they didn't fully understand. Most damaging of all, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Monica had been having an affair with a married client whose wife had recently filed for divorce. The client, David Chun, was a local business owner who had hired Monica to help him find a house after his separation. Their relationship had started as professional but quickly became personal, and Monica had been using inside information about David's divorce proceedings to help him hide assets from his estranged wife. Elaine's secrets were harder to uncover, but persistence paid off. Elaine worked as a bookkeeper for several small businesses in town, and she had always been very proud of her reputation for honesty and discretion. However, through careful examination of public business records and information that came to light through her own careless comments, I discovered that Elaine had been embezzling small amounts from her clients over several years. The scheme was sophisticated but not undetectable. Elaine would create fake invoices for office supplies, maintenance services, and other business expenses, then divert the payments to accounts she controlled. The amounts were small enough that they didn't trigger any immediate red flags, but over time, she had stolen thousands of dollars from her clients. I also learned through tax records that Elaine had been falsely claiming Brandon's business as a dependent entity on her tax returns to reduce her own tax burden, even though she had no legal right to do so. This had been ongoing for 3 years and had saved her thousands in taxes. With all this information compiled, I started phase 2 of my plan. I began reaching out to the appropriate authorities. I filed reports with the IRS about both Brandon's and Elaine's tax fraud. I contacted the Department of Labor about Brandon's labor violations. I reported Monica to the State Real Estate Commission, and also reached out to David Chin's divorce attorney with information about the affair and asset hiding. But I didn't stop there. I also started building a case for my divorce. The deeper I dug into Brandon's business, the more disgusted I became. I found emails where he had instructed his foreman to pay certain workers in cash and to keep it quiet. There were text messages joking about how much money he was saving by avoiding all that government. The casual way he talked about cheating the system, combined with how he had treated Chloe, painted a picture of a man with no moral compass whatsoever. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from Brandon's own phone, which I had legitimate access to as his wife when he asked me to check his messages while he was working. He had been texting with Monica about ways to hide income from the IRS, and Monica had suggested using Elaine's bookkeeping connections to create fake business expenses. The three of them had essentially been running a family fraud operation, and they were all implicated in each other's crimes. I also discovered that Brandon had been bad-mouthing Chloe to his friends and coworkers for years. In group text messages with his construction buddies, he referred to Chloe as the baggage, and complained about having to pretend to care about someone else's kid. He had joked about how Chloe wasn't really his daughter, and how he was stuck dealing with her because of me. Reading those messages was like being punched in the stomach. This man had looked Chloe in the eye and told her he loved her. He had helped her with homework, taken her to school events, and walked her down the aisle at our wedding as her new daddy. All of that had been an act. In his mind, Chloe was nothing more than an inconvenience he had to tolerate to keep me happy. But the most devastating discovery came when I found Brandon's journal. He kept it in his bedside drawer, and as his wife sharing the same bedroom, I had encountered it while cleaning. The entries painted a picture of a man who had married me primarily for financial stability and convenience. He wrote about how my job provided good health insurance, how I handled all the household management, and how I never questioned his spending or demanded too much of his time. About Chloe, he wrote, "She's not that bad, but she's not mine. Sometimes I forget that and start feeling like her real dad, but then Hannah talks about her real father or Chloe acts up and I remember she's just part of the package deal. I wish Hannah didn't have her. Sometimes things would be so much easier if it was just us." More recent entries, written after family gatherings, revealed how much he resented having to defend Chloe to his family. "Mom and Monica are right that Chloe doesn't really fit in with our family. She's too sensitive and she doesn't have the same values we do. I'm tired of pretending she's as important to me as Tyler and Sophia. At least they're actual family." The final entry, written just days before the Christmas party, was the most damaging. "I think I need to start setting boundaries with Hannah about Chloe. Mom is right that we spoil her too much and let her think she's equal to the other kids. Maybe if I stop defending her so much, Hannah will realize that Chloe needs to learn her place in the family hierarchy. She's not a real granddaughter or niece, so why should she get the same treatment?" Reading that entry, I realized that the Christmas party hadn't been a spontaneous moment of cruelty. Brandon had been planning to put Chloe in her place for weeks. He had essentially given his family permission to treat her badly, and when the moment came, he had participated eagerly. During this time I maintained a completely normal facade at home. I continued cooking dinner, doing laundry, and taking care of Chloe as if nothing had changed. Brandon had no idea that his entire world was about to collapse. The acting required was exhausting. Every morning, I would wake up next to this man who had betrayed my daughter and me in the most fundamental way, and I would have to smile and ask him how he wanted his eggs. Every evening, he would come home and complain about work stress or his family's drama, and I would nod sympathetically while secretly documenting everything he said. The hardest part was protecting Chloe from the truth, while also preparing her for what was coming. I started having gentle conversations with her about how sometimes families change and how people don't always treat us the way we deserve. I began taking her to a child therapist under the guise of helping her process what had happened at the Christmas party. But really, I was preparing her for the divorce and custody battle that was coming. Chloe was incredibly perceptive for an 8-year-old. She could sense that something was different. Even though I tried to keep everything normal, she started asking questions like, "Are you and Brandon going to get divorced? And do I have to see Grandma Elaine anymore? Her questions told me that she was already mentally preparing to leave this toxic situation behind. I also started building a support network for both of us. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my marriage to Brandon, partly because his family had monopolized so much of our social time. I strengthened my relationship with my sister and my parents, explaining the situation and asking for their support when everything inevitably fell apart. My sister Karen was furious when I told her what had been happening. "Hannah, why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" I knew Elaine was cold, but I had no idea they were treating Chloe like that. "I kept hoping it would get better," I admitted. "I thought if I just tried harder, if Chloe and I just proved ourselves somehow, they would eventually accept us." "That's not how toxic people work," Karen said. "They don't want you to prove yourselves. They want you to know your place, which is beneath them. I'm proud of you for finally fighting back." My parents were more cautious about my plans for revenge. My mother worried that I was putting myself at legal risk by gathering evidence against Brandon's family. My father, a retired police officer, helped me understand exactly what evidence would be most useful to investigators and how to document everything properly without breaking any laws myself. "You have to be smarter than they are," my father warned. "If you do anything illegal or unethical in the process of exposing them, it could backfire and hurt your custody case." I took his advice seriously. Every piece of evidence I gathered was obtained legally. Financial documents I had legitimate access to as Brandon's wife. Text messages and emails I found on devices I was authorized to use as his spouse. Elaine's bookkeeping irregularities I discovered through public records and information that became apparent through her own statements. Monica's real estate violations I uncovered through public property records, and by talking to people in the industry who knew about her practices. The most challenging part was maintaining my emotional equilibrium during this process. Some days I was filled with rage at how they had treated Chloe. Other days I was overwhelmed with sadness about the end of my marriage, and the realization that the man I had loved was not who I thought he was. And some days I was terrified that my plan would backfire and Chloe would end up worse off than before. But every time I wavered, I would remember Chloe's face at that Christmas party, the confusion in her eyes when Elaine grabbed her, the way she had looked around the room for anyone to defend her, the sound of her sobs as she pressed her face against my legs while a room full of adults laughed at her pain. That memory kept me focused and determined. Chloe deserved better than this family. She deserved better than a stepfather who saw her as baggage. She deserved to grow up knowing that she was valued and loved unconditionally, not tolerated as part of a package deal. I also used this time to strengthen my own position professionally and financially. I had been working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized company, but I had always been capable of more. I started taking on additional projects, volunteering for high-visibility assignments, and networking within my industry. When my supervisor's position opened up unexpectedly several months later, I was ready to apply and demonstrate my capabilities. Getting the promotion was crucial for my long-term plans. It came with a significant salary increase and better benefits, which would be essential for supporting Chloe as a single mother. It also gave me more credibility and stability, which would look good in custody proceedings. Brandon was actually supportive of my career advancement, which was ironic given what I was planning. He bragged to his friends about his wife's promotion and how much more money we would have coming in. He had no idea that the extra income would be funding my escape from him and his toxic family. By the time I was ready to execute my retribution plan, I had been living a double life for nearly 8 months. On the surface, I was the devoted wife supporting her husband through his business challenges and family drama. Underneath, I was methodically dismantling the foundation of their lives, while constructing a new future for Chloe and myself. Chloe, meanwhile, was struggling with what had happened at the Christmas party. She had nightmares and started asking why Grandma Elaine and Aunt Monica didn't like her. I worked with a child therapist to help Chloe process the trauma, and the therapist was willing to provide documentation of the emotional harm that had been caused by Brandon's family's behavior. The waiting was the hardest part. I had submitted all my reports and evidence to the appropriate authorities, but investigations take time. While I waited for the official wheels to start turning, I had to continue living with Brandon and pretending that everything was normal. Brandon was completely oblivious to what was coming. He continued his illegal business practices, confident that he was too smart to get caught. He even brought home a new client contract and bragged about how he was going to inflate the costs to increase his profit margin. "This guy is loaded and he has no idea what things actually cost," Brandon said, showing me the contract. "I'm going to pad the materials estimate by at least 30%. He'll never know the difference." I nodded and smiled. all while photographing the contract and his handwritten notes about the fraudulent billing plan. Every day he was giving me more evidence to use against him. Elaine called regularly during this period, usually to complain about something or to make plans for family gatherings that I knew would never happen. She seemed to have completely forgotten about the Christmas party incident. Or perhaps she simply didn't care that she had traumatized a child. In her mind, she had put Chloe in her place, and that was the end of it. "Hannah, we should plan a big Easter celebration this year," she said during one phone call. "I want to get professional photos of all the grandchildren together. We can finally get a nice portrait for the mantle. Will Chloe be included in the photos?" I asked, already knowing the answer. There was a pause. "Well, I think we should focus on the biological grandchildren for the family portrait. Chloe can be in some of the casual shots." Of course, even after everything that had happened, she still couldn't bring herself to treat Chloe as an equal member of the family. That phone call eliminated any lingering doubts I had about what I was doing. Monica was equally oblivious. She continued her affair with David Chan and her unethical real estate practices, apparently convinced that she was too clever to face consequences. She even invited me to lunch one day to brag about her latest conquest. "I sold 3 houses this month," she said, picking at her salad. "One of them wasn't even officially on the market yet, but I knew the owners were thinking about selling, so I brought my clients by for a preview. They made an offer on the spot." "How did you get access to a house that wasn't listed?" I asked innocently. Monica winked. "I have my ways. Sometimes you have to bend the rules a little to get ahead in this business." She was essentially confessing to trespassing and unethical business practices, and she was proud of it. I made careful notes of our conversation afterward, adding it to the growing pile of evidence I was accumulating. During this waiting period, I also focused on preparing Chloe for the changes that were coming. The child therapist, Dr. Martinez, was incredibly helpful in this process. She worked with Chloe to process the trauma from the Christmas party, while also building her resilience for the future. "Chloe is a very strong little girl," Dr. Martinez told me after one session. "She's been through a lot, but she has good coping mechanisms and a strong sense of self-worth, which I think she gets from you. The most important thing is that she knows she has at least one adult who loves her unconditionally and will protect her." I started having regular mother-daughter dates with Chloe, taking her to museums, parks, and restaurants where we could talk privately. During these outings, I would ask her about her feelings and help her understand that none of what had happened was her fault. "Mommy," she said during one of these conversations, "why doesn't Brandon's family like me?" "Sometimes people are mean because they're unhappy with themselves," I explained. "It has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. You are wonderful exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that is missing out." "Are we going to keep living with Brandon?" she asked. "Would you be okay if we didn't?" I asked carefully. Chloe thought about it for a moment. "I think I would be okay with that. I like Brandon sometimes, but I don't like how he acts when his family is around, and I don't want to see Grandma Elaine anymore." These conversations confirmed that Chloe would be emotionally prepared for the divorce when it happened. She was already mentally distancing herself from Brandon's family, and she trusted me to make the right decisions for our future. I also used this time to research the best divorce attorneys in the area. I consulted with 3 different lawyers before settling on Rebecca Stone, a family law attorney with a reputation for aggressive advocacy and a specialty in high-conflict divorces involving children. "Based on what you've told me," Rebecca said during our initial consultation, "you have a very strong case for primary custody and a favorable asset division. The evidence you've gathered about your husband's character and his family's treatment of Chloe will be compelling to any judge." Rebecca also helped me understand the timeline and process of divorce proceedings, so I could coordinate the divorce filing with the climax of the investigations into Brandon's family. The goal was to hit them with everything at once, maximizing the psychological impact and minimizing their ability to regroup and respond. As the months passed, I could see the stress building in Brandon's family, even though they didn't yet know why they were feeling uneasy. Elaine complained about having trouble sleeping. Monica mentioned that she felt like someone was watching her. Brandon became increasingly paranoid about his business competitors, and worried that someone was trying to sabotage him. Their guilt and fear were manifesting as anxiety. Even though they didn't consciously understand what they were afraid of, it was like they could sense that something was coming, that their past actions were finally catching up with them. 10 months after the Christmas party, the first domino fell. Brandon came home from work looking shaken. "Hannah, something weird happened today. A guy from the Department of Labor showed up at my job site asking questions about my employees and payroll records." I looked up from the dinner I was preparing, feigning concern. "That sounds serious. What did you tell him?" "I told him everything was fine, that all my guys are legitimate employees, but he seemed really suspicious, like he already knew something. 2 weeks later, Elaine called Brandon in a panic. Someone reported me to the IRS, Brandon. They're auditing my personal taxes and asking questions about my bookkeeping clients. I don't understand how this happened. Brandon was getting paranoid. Mom, this is too much of a coincidence. First me, now you. Someone is targeting our family. Monica's troubles started the following month. She called Brandon crying, saying that the State Real Estate Commission had opened an investigation into her business practices. A few weeks after that, David Chen's wife's attorney had somehow gotten hold of evidence about Monica's affair and was using it in the divorce proceedings. Brandon was beside himself. This can't be random, Hannah. Someone has it out for my family. Who would do something like this? I just shrugged. Maybe your family has more enemies than you think. The investigations moved more slowly than portrayed in movies, but they were thorough. Over the course of a year, Brandon's business was hit with substantial fines for labor violations and tax fraud. The IRS placed liens on his business accounts while they conducted their investigation, severely limiting his ability to operate Brandon Construction. Several of his clients filed complaints when they learned about his fraudulent billing practices, and a few even filed lawsuits. Elaine lost several of her bookkeeping clients when word of the IRS investigation spread through the small business community. She was facing both civil and criminal charges, and her reputation was destroyed. The stress caused her to develop health problems, and she was hospitalized twice for anxiety-related issues. Monica's real estate license was suspended pending the investigation. She lost her biggest client when David Chen's wife's attorney obtained evidence of the affair and its impact on the divorce proceedings. The affair became public knowledge in their small real estate community, and Monica found herself unemployable at most agencies in the area. But I still wasn't done. While all of this was happening, I had been working with my divorce attorney to prepare the strongest possible case for custody of Chloe and division of assets. Brandon had no idea that I was planning to leave him, so he hadn't taken any steps to protect his interests. When Brandon's business was severely weakened by the investigations, I made my move. On a Thursday evening in November, 14 months after the Christmas party, Brandon came home to find divorce papers waiting for him on the kitchen table. I had taken Chloe to my sister's house for the night so we could talk privately. Brandon was stunned. Hannah, what is this? We can work through whatever problems we're having. This is just a rough patch because of all the business stuff. I sat across from him at the same kitchen table where I had planned this entire campaign over a year earlier. Brandon, I'm divorcing you because you allowed your family to abuse my daughter, and then you participated in it. But more than that, I'm divorcing you because I've lost all respect for the kind of man you are. He tried to argue, to make excuses, to blame his family's behavior on stress and misunderstandings. But I had heard enough excuses to last a lifetime. I know about the tax fraud, Brandon. I know about the workers you've been paying under the table, the inflated invoices, the business expenses you've been claiming for personal use. I know everything. The color drained from his face. Hannah, you don't understand. Business is complicated. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to stay competitive. No, Brandon. Sometimes you have to choose between being honest and being successful. You chose to be dishonest, just like you chose to throw Chloe under the bus to please your family. The divorce proceedings were challenging for Brandon. Because I had documented evidence of his financial misconduct and character issues, I was able to secure a favorable settlement that protected Chloe's future and my own. Brandon had to sell the house to pay his legal fees and the various penalties he was facing, and he ended up moving back in with Elaine. Monica's marriage fell apart when her husband learned about the affair and her professional troubles. She lost her house in her own divorce and had to move in with Elaine as well. The three of them, squeezed into Elaine's house, spent their days dealing with lawyers, creditors, and the wreckage of their former lives. But the most satisfying part of my revenge came 18 months after the divorce was finalized. I had rebuilt my life completely. Chloe and I moved to a beautiful apartment across town, and I had been promoted again at my job. Chloe was thriving in therapy and had made new friends at her new school. We were happier than we had ever been. That's when I decided to send Elaine a letter. Dear Elaine, I wrote. I thought you should know that I was the one who reported your family to the authorities. I spent months documenting Brandon's business fraud, your embezzlement, and Monica's real estate violations. I did this because of what you did to my daughter at your Christmas party. When you grabbed Chloe and called her trash, when Monica laughed and agreed, when Brandon said he wouldn't bring us to family events anymore because we ruin everything, you all made a choice. You chose to be cruel to an innocent child for no reason other than your own prejudice and meanness. I want you to understand that every fine Brandon has paid, Every client you've lost, every night Monica has cried herself to sleep, and every day you've spent worrying about legal consequences, all of it happened because you couldn't find it in your heart to be kind to an 8-year-old girl. Chloe is doing wonderfully now. She's confident, happy, and surrounded by people who love and appreciate her. She rarely asks about Brandon's family anymore, which I think says everything about the kind of people you are. I hope that in whatever time you have left, you'll think about the choices you made and the kind of legacy you want to leave behind. I hope you'll think about how much pain you could have avoided if you had just been decent human beings. But mostly, I hope you remember Chloe's face when you grabbed her arm and called her trash. I hope you remember it every time you're writing a check to pay your legal fees, every time you see Monica crying over her ruined marriage, and every time Brandon complains about having to start over at 45 years old. Your actions had consequences. I just made sure those consequences found their way back to you. I will never forgive any of you for what you did to my daughter, but I'm grateful for it in a way, because it showed me exactly who you are, and gave me the motivation to remove your toxicity from our lives permanently. Chloe and I are living our best life now, and we never think about you unless we're counting our blessings that we escaped. Have the life you deserve. Hannah. I never heard back from Elaine, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had a significant emotional response to reading the letter. She ended up requiring additional therapy and medical care for stress-related health issues. Brandon tried to contact me several times after that, but I had blocked him on all platforms. He sent messages through mutual friends, begging me to help him understand how to rebuild his life, claiming that he had learned his lesson and wanted to make amends. But it was too late for apologies. The damage was done, and more importantly, I had seen his true character. When push came to shove, he had chosen his toxic family over his wife and stepdaughter. That's not the kind of mistake he could recover from. Chloe is 12 now, and she's an amazing kid. She's confident, articulate, and has a strong sense of justice that I think she learned from watching how I handled this situation. She knows the whole story now age appropriately, and she's proud that her mom stood up for her when no one else would. We have a new life, new friends, and new traditions. Chloe calls my apartment our safe house, because she knows that no one here will ever make her feel unwanted or unloved. We spend holidays with my family and close friends, people who celebrate Chloe for who she is rather than tolerating her presence. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about what I did to Brandon's family. The answer is no, not even a little bit. They made choices, and I simply made sure those choices had appropriate consequences. They chose to be dishonest in their business dealings. They chose to be cruel to a child, and they chose to prioritize their prejudices over basic human decency. I just chose not to protect them from the results of their own actions. The truth is, I probably could have divorced Brandon and moved on without exposing his family's illegal activities, but that wouldn't have taught them anything. They would have continued being the same toxic, cruel people they had always been, probably hurting other children and other families along the way. By exposing their illegal activities and holding them accountable for their behavior, I did more than just get revenge. I protected other potential victims and sent a clear message that actions have consequences, even when those actions seem small or insignificant at the time. What happened at that Christmas party lasted maybe 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes revealed the true character of everyone involved, and they changed the trajectory of multiple lives. Elaine, Monica, and Brandon learned that cruelty has a price. Chloe learned that she has value, and that someone will always fight for her. And I learned that I'm stronger and more resourceful than I ever imagined. 4 years later, I can honestly say that walking out of that Christmas party was the best decision I ever made. Not just because of the revenge, though that was satisfying, but because it forced me to take control of my life and create the kind of future that Chloe and I deserved. Brandon's family thought they could humiliate us with impunity. They thought their cruelty would have no consequences because I was just the weak daughter-in-law who would never fight back. They were wrong, and now they know exactly how wrong they were every single day when they wake up in the life I helped create for them. Sometimes revenge really is a dish best served cold. But in this case, it was also served with precise calculation, meticulous planning, and a mother's love for her child. Chloe and I are living proof that you don't have to accept other people's cruelty. You can choose to fight back, and if you're smart about it, you can win. The best part: we're not just surviving, we're thriving. And every day we build our new life is another day that proves we made the right choice to leave their toxicity behind. That's my story. That's how 5 minutes of cruelty turned into 4 years of consequences, and how a mother's love became a family's downfall. They wanted to make my daughter cry. Instead, they gave me the motivation to make sure they would never stop paying for what they did. Justice isn't always about the legal system. Sometimes it's about making sure that people who choose to be cruel face the full weight of their choices. And in this case, justice was served exactly as cold as they deserved.